The one thing I always try to encourage folks with is the idea that change of any kind, whether you're not where you want to be in your career, your business hadn't gotten to the level you want, maybe you're looking at your personal life thinking, oh, I put on a little too much weight, or I really would love to change this. We tend to get overwhelmed by trying to change everything all at once.
Okay.
And the reason I believe this idea of competing every day is so important is because it takes 1% to be better than you were the day before. And it's so tiny you don't even see it. But over time, that 1% stacks to a very noticeable result. And so if you're wanting to change your health, start by doing just a 20-minute walk outside today, or swap that pizza and wings you were going to have at lunch for a salad. It's one little thing. On its own, it doesn't look like much. But if you woke up tomorrow and said, what's one more thing I can do? And you start to add on to it, creates massive results. And so most of America, I think, doesn't take action because they're too overwhelmed trying to do everything versus looking for one little thing they can do. And so my encouragement to anyone is just to say, hey, what do I want to be better at? Who do I want to be in 5 years from now? What's something that they would do where they'd be more disciplined, more focused, better with their habits, and say, what's one thing I could do today to be a little more like that, and start working down that path and play the 5-year game instead of trying to win the 5-minute one.
Welcome to the Self-Funded with Spencer podcast. Healthcare is broken, and we aim to fix it one conversation at a time.
Jake Thompson, how are you, man?
What's happening? Excited to hang out.
I'm excited to hang out. We cross paths all the time here in Maker's Gym. We actually finally get to hang out, which is fun. I got to get you on a podcast to do that, man. All right. Good to know. Good to know. So, Jake, I noticed you're the CEO, but the Chief Encouragement Officer of Compete Every Day. So tell me about that title. I'm sure you picked it, right? What does
very
that mean
much.
to you? Yeah.
Very much. Yeah. So when I started Compete back in 11, one of the inspirations was Life is Good. If you're familiar with the t-shirt company out of Boston, their logo is ironically a stick figure guy named Jake. Okay. And so they go by the two brothers, Bert, and I can't think of his brother's name, the Jacobs brothers. Chief Optimism Officer is the COO. And I forgot what the other one's role is for like a CEO type position. And I thought, man, that's really creative from a conversation starter.
Okay.
And I'm like, what do I actually want to do? And really the core principle of Compete is to equip and encourage people to change their mindset and educate them how to do that so they can change their life. And the biggest piece of that, in my opinion, is courage, because it's scary to do change. I mean, we all want change, but we don't want to have to do anything outside of our comfort zone to create change, which is kind of that weird relationship. And so for me, the idea of inspiring courage in other people, which is essentially what encouragement is, was such a key piece of that I was like, I think that's what I want to use. And it's going to easily be a conversation starter when people see it. And so I just kind of embraced it.
It literally just started the conversation on the podcast.
Yeah.
So kudos to you, man. You nailed it on that, the insight there. So just for the folks that are listening, this is not going to be an insurance or benefit show. Fortunately, as the host, I get carte blanche to decide what we're going to talk about. But I really wanted to touch base with you, Jake, because, again, we're crossing paths. We've known each other, I think, for about 10 years after.
We're about a decade in,
strong together. But you are an entrepreneur, man, and that's what I love to talk about. I think probably about a third of the people I've had on this podcast, they are entrepreneurs at heart. It just happens to be in the insurance industry. So we're going to talk about that. Fitness is a big part of your life, motivation, building a company, all that stuff. Keynote speaking, which I know you do as well. And so I want to highlight all that. But before we get into your business, let's get to know Jake a little bit more. So really briefly, tell me your background. Who are you? How'd you get here, man?
Yeah, as we laughed, I grew up about 2 hours east of Dallas in the teeny tiny small town of Jacksonville, Texas, population 13,000 people.
I thought you were going to say 13.
No, not that small. My mom grew up outside of Lubbock, Texas, in a town of like a couple hundred. So she can relate to very much that 13 number. I think that may have been her graduating class. But no, grew up in Jacksonville as an only child. Grew up, first job was working in Dad's gas stations. He had a couple of Diamond Shamrock stores, and so I would spend my summers cleaning parking lots, stocking coolers, everything that you do not want to do at 7, 8 years old. And grew up, went to TCU in Fort Worth, thought I was going to be the next Jerry Maguire. So I left TCU, went right into grad school, got my MBA at sports business at the University of Dallas, and then started working over the years until eventually started Compete in 2011. But today, as you said, I'm married. I've got my wife, Elena's in the real estate industry. I've got 3 dogs, which are practically our kids. Sugar is our boxer. Donut and biscuit are our two Frenchies. You can sense the theme there of the guy who loves to eat sweets and donuts, despite the love of fitness.
I was going to say, we'll unpack that.
That's always there. And so love what I get to do every day. And so, Texas is home, and
Well, so entrepreneurship, obviously it sounds like your father. That was going to be one of my questions, is like, where did that inspiration come from? Do you think you got that from dad?
Easily.
Okay.
So my mom's dad was a cotton farmer in West Texas. My dad's dad was a general contractor here in DFW. So they both were kind of running their own business. Dad, I grew up, ever since I was born, Dad had his own little gas station and eventually grew it up. And the thing I appreciated and liked about it, especially as a kid, is Dad never missed a practice, never missed a game. And I thought about that, and I was like, one day when I have kids, whenever that may come, like, I want to have some of that same freedom, as well as, I saw the just roller coaster my dad went on of times are good. We had an employee still hundreds of thousands of dollars, like just emotional roller coaster every entrepreneur knows. And that part was a little scary, but I love the idea of I'm the master of my fate. And there's always forces outside of our control, but I always saw like what my dad would do and how he responded, and thought, I want to at least be able to take agency of my journey in that. And if I'm going to win, I want to do because I'm working hard and I'm putting the right team together and all of that. And if I lose, I want to be able to own it and not say, well, it's because this boss fired me or because of this industry layoff, and I couldn't help it.
You can't hide as the business owner, right?
No.
You sink or swim based on your own merits and your own ability and the work ethic and things like that. I think that is the attractive element to a lot of people that sort of envision themselves as entrepreneurs. I think the downside to what you're describing as well, that everybody is going to experience at some point during that journey. But I want to ask you before we move on, you said you wanted to be Jerry Maguire. So you athlete growing up, I presume, right? What sport?
Football. Texas,
well,
man.
Okay, that's where
football in small town Texas is Friday Night Lights.
Yeah.
Like, I was a kid sitting in the stands and ringing the cowbell and watching. We were the Jacksonville Indians, watching the team play and just being like, I wanted to be out there. And so that was my love. First love. I laugh.
What position?
Quarterback.
Nice. Okay,
So,
I didn't know that.
QB. Went to TCU to play, had an academic athletic scholarship to go play there. Got hurt the summer before my senior year, so didn't get a chance to play. But football was always the love. And the quarterback position I loved because you got to direct everybody. And you obviously, we know it, like, you're going to burden the loss and then you share the wins.
Yeah.
And I loved that aspect of it because it definitely reminded me from an entrepreneurial level, same thing. We share the wins, I burden the losses. And so that mentality's kind of always been there.
Share the win, burden the losses. I like that, man. So because that happened, right, I think that probably motivated your interest to be an agent, right? You wanted to be the Jerry Maguire 2.0. What happened? What derailed that interest, though?
This podcast is brought to you by True Captive Insurance, a premier medical stop-loss captive for employer groups ranging from 25 to 1,000 employees. True Captive believes in healthcare that is personal and insurance that isn't complicated. That's why they take a white glove approach, making it easy for employer groups to transition into a program built specifically for them. Check them out at truecaptive.com. This podcast is sponsored by PlanSight. PlanSight is a technology for employee benefits brokers to more efficiently manage their RFP process for any group size, all funding types, and over 20 benefit lines and point solutions. PlanSight is the only end-to-end RFP technology on the market today. Let's modernize your RFP process together. Check us out at plansight.com.
Yeah, so very tough industry to get in, and it's never as pretty as you think it is. My sophomore year of college, I sent about 100 letters out to agents. Every agent and agency I could find an address for, trying to get an internship.
Okay.
And I got responses back from 4. 2 were rejection letters. 1 offered, I did get an internship opportunity. The agency actually represented 2 guys I went to high school with, or went to our high school, that played pro ball. The problem was it was downtown Chicago. It was an unpaid internship. I'm a college kid who's not making any money, and I'm like, I can't afford a $2,000 a month.
Right.
Single bedroom apartment by myself, unpaid internship for 3 to 4 months or 6 months. Jeez. So that was out. So then I had one other guy who was like, yeah, I'll let you do some research for me and start to learn it. So he ended up giving me an opportunity while he was with another agency. He left to start his own thing. I felt obligated to go. not the best move in the long run. He was just a very shady individual.
Oh, yeah.
The old agency he was at, I'm actually still friends with that owner. Still get to talk to Drew all the time. Fantastic dude. But yeah, the agent was a little shady. And what really got me is I laugh that it's sales. And at 21, 22, I was emotionally immature and ill-prepared for that journey because you pick out 12 to 14 guys, you call them, you start recruiting them. Over the course of 6 to 8 months, 4 or 5 break up with you. You break up with 4 or 5 because it's not a fit. You hope you sit down with 3 or 4, and if you're lucky, you sign 1. And it's an emotion because you're getting to know these guys and their families and their dreams. And so it's just kind of that, it's almost like being on The Bachelor. And I laugh about that. But the last year I had 2 kids. One I went to TCU with, and one was at a small school called McNeese State down in Lake Charles, Louisiana.
Yeah.
And I had back-to-back meetings within 12 hours. So I was in Fort Worth, had the meeting. This kid, phenomenal guy, but was not going to get drafted. And I had to pretty much crush his dreams and say, you're not going to get picked. Here's what we can do to help you make a team, but you're not going to get drafted. And you could just see the fire start to fade in his eyes, and it killed me. And then I drove overnight to Louisiana for another meeting with a kid that was going to be a 2nd or 3rd round pick, ended up being the 2nd or 3rd pick in the 3rd round. And we're sitting there talking, and the agent is with me because I couldn't sign guys at the time yet because I still hadn't finished my master's and gotten certified. The agent got up to go to the bathroom, and the kid looked at me and said, Jake, I love you. I would work with you, but I don't trust the guy you work with. And so I'm going to go sign with this other agency, which ironically was the agency in Chicago I could have interned with. And I remember sitting at that spot and was like, this is not what I wanted. Like, this sucks.
Yeah.
One, I don't want to be associated with this guy and anybody that questions character. The second, I just don't want to ride this roller coaster every single year.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I want out. The problem with that is I got out 2 weeks before I finished my grad school and my master's, and in 2008. So the recession was full on.
Okay. Yeah.
Couldn't get a job. Best Buy wouldn't even hire me for holiday hours because I have a non-traditional work experience of being in the agency. I worked for the Cowboys for a little bit, arena football, and then I have this MBA. So it was kind of like, well, you're experienced, but not in the way we want, and you're overeducated for entry level. So it put me in a really awkward spot where I had to kind of start consulting on my own and figure it out.
So what were you consulting about? What were you doing?
So my background, MBA, so marketing strategy, branding, and at that time, social media was so new.
Okay.
And everybody had this idea that it's traditional media, put out ads, put out push. And I started talking to clients about how do we just create content that people want to engage with? Quit worrying about pushing an ad message, and how do you create a webinar or a blog post that actually informs? And so I started working with a large tech firm here that's since been merged and acquired a few times, teeny tiny e-commerce company, worked with one of the arena football teams, and I'd started piecing together projects and clients on referrals. So I had a small marketing consulting agency with a variety of clients doing well, but not happy with the work I was doing in terms of it just didn't fill me up. I didn't enjoy it. Yeah, but it was paying the bills in a time I needed to pay the bills.
Yeah, well, that's fair. Hey, we all would make those decisions at some point, right?
That's right.
I totally understand that. So, but the idea of going into business for yourself in the compete everyday realm, I want to start getting into that business because I know that's where you exist today. That's what you've built over the last 10, 12 years. So the kind of inspiration for this inception of I want to build a clothing brand that has an inspirational message tied behind it. Where'd that come from?
Yeah, so consulting started, we'll say 2009, about 2000, mid 2010, probably around the time I started at CrossFit Strong, where we ended up meeting.
Yeah.
Super unhappy with the work I was doing. Great money, going out on the weekends, but I was like, I'm selling billable hours. Okay. If I stop working, there's no money.
Yeah.
And I was learning about how do you build recurring income and passive income on one hand. And on the other hand, I was like, I'm not doing anything to impact anyone other than myself. There's only so many toys, so many parties, things you can go to. There's got to be something I can do that actually helps others. And I started tinkering with these ideas. Ultimately, out of that, and thanks to a push by a book called A Million Miles in 1,000 Years by Donald Miller, I started evaluating the story I was living and how I wanted to help others change their story. Really based in the fact of earlier on in life, fear would show up as discomfort, fear of other people's opinions, fear of how I'd fail, all the fears that we still deal with on a daily basis. And I remember giving into fear in those moments and allowing it to talk me out of chasing certain opportunities and remembering that those decisions haunted me. It's that burden piece. The fear of or failure is always a lighter burden than regret ever is. And the question of what if I'd gone after it. And I remember kind of evaluating a lot of that and thinking, how can I help other people go after things even if they fail, knowing in the long run they're going to be much happier and more fulfilled than if they always ask themselves, what if?
Okay.
Or what if I hadn't given up? And so this whole thing started generating into this idea of competing every day against yourself, who you were, what you did yesterday. And at that point, I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just had this message that I was telling people about, and it seemed to resonate. This person was competing to create a better future for their kids than what they grew up with. This person was competing because they were still trying to relive their athletic glory days. This person was competing because they wanted to break through glass ceilings in their company. Everybody had something different that they were doing. And after about 6 to 8 months, my best friend was like, hey, look at Life is Good, T-shirt company, simple phrase. I think there's something you could look at with that. So at the time, I had no other options. I was like, why not? Put some money into a couple of boxes of T-shirts and tank tops, put them in the trunk of my car and started selling them behind CrossFit Strong as literally a side hustle.
Yeah.
Just believing that if I could help change people's mindsets, they could go change their careers and their lives.
Okay. So compete every day. How did you even land on that actual phrase?
Yeah, the initial iteration was stacked, which is really funny, but I saw it as like this idea of how do you live a more fulfilled life in your health, your relationships, your career, your spiritual life, yourself. Instead of settling, what would it look like to strive in all these areas? And so I saw stacked as a way to start stacking all these things on, stacking every day, pursuing greatness off of each of it. Well, the core definition of compete is to strive to gain or win something.
Okay.
And so as I started pulling at this idea of striving instead of settling, competition was always there. Super competitive kid growing up in Texas. I was a smaller guy. I mean, I'm 5'11", maybe 185 now. I would have given anything for the extra 30 pounds that when I was in high school, I was like $150, $155 soaking wet. So I was always a smaller athlete. I had to outwork everybody.
Yeah.
So competition for me was like, I'm going to outsmart you and I'm going to outwork you. I don't care how talented you are. I'm going to find a way to beat you out. And so that mentality was always within the competitive side. That being a part of me, at the same time, getting really into CrossFit again and back to working out from when I stopped, and this idea of pushing yourself against just you and the clock every day, your own scores. How are you going to get better? All started to kind of come together. And I was on a ski trip with 2 buddies going to Durango, Colorado. And I'd been toying with stacked and competitor and compete. And I just kind of threw out, I was like, what about this idea of compete every day? Like, you guys know what I'm trying to communicate. What do you think about that? And both of them instantly, it was probably like 12:30 at night. We were some crazy snow-covered road between New Mexico and Colorado. And both guys were like, that's you. Like, that fits
That's
you
it.
perfectly.
Yeah.
So I had the brand, had no idea what I was going to do with it, but this idea of competing every day really just started to take hold.
I was going to say, so obviously it started, like you said, out of the trunk of
Yeah.
your car, selling outside of a CrossFit. Clearly it has evolved immensely since
Very
then.
much.
So as you start to see, I might be onto something. Oh, okay. Now I'm latching. People are buying that.
Yep.
Maybe this is sustainable. Maybe this is my full job. Like, what was the marker, if you will, where you go, this is a thing that I could actually build. Like, I believe in it now.
Yeah.
I'm sure you always believed in it, but like really when you go, yes,
Yeah.
I'm starting to get there.
You know, it's funny. Selling T-shirts is a really hard way to make money. And I had no idea when I got started. But in 2000, so about a year into it, June 2012, I had a booth at the San Diego Rock and Roll Marathon.
Okay.
And we had a handful of shirts just trying to figure out what the heck we were doing. And one of the shirts on the back, or one of the shirts on the front said, "We are all competitors." And the back had the stack. It said, "Faith, health, dreams, relationships, career, compete every day for your life." And we had it sitting in the booth. And I remember in a matter of like 5 minutes, 3 different people walked up and asked questions about the shirt. 3 completely different questions about the same shirt. And then I would tell them kind of, here's what it means. Here's what we look for. And all 3 of them had different things. They immediately were like, oh, I compete for that. I got to have that shirt.
Cool.
And I was like, okay, we're on to something.
Yeah.
I have no idea what. I have no idea if I can build it, but we're on to something. So that really started to paint that picture. End of 2013, one of my consulting clients, one of my larger consulting clients, we ended the contract. They chose not to renew. And so I was like, well, this is a better time than ever. I got to do this.
Yeah.
I mean, let's go all in. And so 2014 kind of jumped into it, probably little before I was ready for it, and just started saying, we got to figure it out.
Yeah.
And so at that point, it started to go and develop in still the current state of looking at apparel, not even thinking about anything else. I was so focused on how do you be the next Nike, the next Life is Good, going the merchandising route. And it really wasn't until 2015 that my eyes and awareness got opened up when Texas Children's Hospital in Houston reached out. The VP of HR, wonderful woman named Linda Aldred, who I will always credit to changing my life. Her son was a college baseball player that followed us on Twitter, bought some shirts. He loved it. The whole family bought shirts. They loved the brand. She wanted us to sponsor their HR week. 125, 150 employees. They were going to buy a shirt for everybody.
Oh,
At
wow.
that time, I'm like, 150 shirts? Absolutely. What do you need? Let's outfit you. We got it all set up. And then they're like, hey, we want you to come speak. I'm like, about
Speak?
what?
Yeah.
And she's like, Linda wants you to come tell your story and talk about
That's
it.
so great.
I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. But sure, like, they're like, well, what's your fee? I was like, what do you mean? They're like, what's it going to cost? I was like, y'all are buying 150 shirts. Just fly me to Houston. Put me on Southwest. They're like, done. Easy. We're going to pay you a little bit too. So I said, okay. So I show up, corporate event, backwards baseball cap. I mean, I probably look like a young Gary Vee, like backwards baseball cap, t-shirt, no idea what I was doing. I'd scripted out, like, here's my journey. Here's like 3 big lessons I've learned in 3-4 years of business. And just remember doing it and enjoying it. And afterwards, Linda pulled me aside and said, if you haven't thought about it, you need to go do more of this.
Yeah.
There's something here that I think you need to chase. I was like, oh, okay. And so the seed was planted, but I didn't really think about it until a little bit later when that seed started to grow.
That's amazing, man. It was funny. I was thinking, I certainly didn't want to stop your flow, but I was thinking it's almost like when you decided, hey, I'm selling this inspirational message of compete every day, you had to go and decide yourself to actually compete every day, right? Like you were split between 2 worlds at that point, and it's like, well, life's going, well, Jake, you're trying to tell everybody else to do this. Are you ready to do this yourself? And it's so funny when you hear the message, and like I said, I've spoken to a lot of entrepreneurs. It doesn't always go great at first. Many of them tell you it went terribly at first, but it's when they committed to it and they kind of went all in that all of a sudden life sort of moving in the direction to support them, right?
Yeah,
That maybe is an example of that you just shared with us.
No, it is, and it's funny. One of my best friends, who's also in our industry, or your industry, I should say, we had coffee or lunch about 8 months into it. So end of 2011, he was at CrossFit with us, and we went out to lunch. He's like, "How's it going?" I was like, "Not as well as I thought." He was like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "Thought I'd be making a lot more money by now."
Yeah.
And he laughed and he said, "Well, it's a good thing you're your own worst accountability partner." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, listen, you built this brand that's all about showing up and competing every day, regardless of the obstacles you face, regardless of what life has put in your way. You have to show up and find a way through it." Mm-hmm. He said, whether it's one person that believes this, 100, or one day 100,000 or 1,000,000, he said, there's people, and he showed me his wristband, wearing your wristband, that believe this. Mm-hmm. So you're stuck. Like, you can't quit.
Yeah.
There's no giving up. Hey, it didn't work out. You can change the business, you can pivot, but you always got to keep going with it. Mm-hmm. And I laughed about it at the time. 2 years later, when I was leaving an event in Los Angeles that we just lost a ton of money that we didn't really have, and I was driving through the desert toward Vegas, and I'm going through every entrepreneur is always going to have those nights where you just question, what did I get myself into? How do I get out of this? This was a terrible idea. His words started coming back to me. Mm-hmm. And it was like, I'm spending all this time and energy wondering, how do I get out of this mess instead of how do I change course and rebound? And it was really the game changer for me in that moment. And I'm glad it happened then rather than later, of understanding there's no quit, because people have bought into this message, and I'm not living authentically if I give up on it. And I'm telling them that what I've talked about and what I've preached about is not actually real. Mm-hmm. And so I have to live it. And so in that moment, it really changed my whole attitude of, no matter how bad it gets, find a way to pivot and get out of it. Don't look for a way to quit and get rid of the responsibility.
That's just the point, right? The pivot versus quit is the
Yep.
biggest thing. And I had a gentleman on my podcast a month or so ago, Randy Ryder, and he talked about sometimes failure doesn't have to be a period. It could be an ellipses, right? It could be a ... It's like, all right, well, what am I going to do differently now? Not do I quit? Anybody can essentially quit, and then it is literally over.
Yep.
And most of the time, the choice to quit is the reason it failed. It's not that something else would have kept you from succeeding. You literally just quit and you chose to stop.
Yep.
It is over now. So as the brand is evolving, you get into the speaking engagement. You didn't really intend to do it. Then maybe that wasn't the path you wanted to go down. Was it Linda you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Linda says, you know what, Jake, this is probably something you should think about. Did you heed her message like right away, or did it take some time?
It took some time. The funny part is later that year, so the way our business was constructed at the time, we had a small design and ops team of 3. I had another assistant who helped on the fulfillment side, super small team, and then events team. But I was traveling Thursday and Friday through Saturday, Sunday, Monday for CrossFit events and race marathons and expos. And I was getting worn out on that. And I was tired of, you go sell 10, 20,000, you come home, you cut a check for 10 to 15,000 because you need more inventory. And I was just always watching this cash sitting in product game and thought, man, there's got to be a better way. And I got trapped a little bit in the comparison game of looking at other brands in CrossFit and fitness in general and running, and thought, what are we missing that we're not growing as fast in my head that I think we should?
Sure.
And my team at the time was like, listen, we do a lot of the same things other groups do. We have a great brand message, but what separates us is how you go and talk about it. Mm-hmm. So whether it's a book, whether it's you writing more blogs or getting on video, like you need to go tell this message more. I said, okay, don't know how to do that. We'll figure it out. So that's 15. So it's always starting to fester a little bit of like, I want to do something else. We looked at rebranding the brand actually in late 15 of like an online education software of like, how do we create courses and stuff around it? Kind of wish we'd done that then versus how long it took later.
Yeah.
But it just kind of, we talked about it and never really pulled the trigger because e-commerce was doing so well and kept growing for us. 2016, I go to Social Media Marketing World, and there's a guy named Michael Port who's hosting a breakout.
Okay.
If you've not read his first book, Book Yourself Solid, it's a phenomenal book about building relationships and recurring client business. It's phenomenal for this industry.
Okay.
Well, Michael wrote the book, built a licensing system around it, but then he pivoted because Michael's background is in acting. He was on Pelican Brief, Sex and the City, a lot of that stuff. And he wrote a book at that time that had just come out called Steal the Show, how to crush job interviews, first dates, presentations. And he looks at giving presentations and talks, not through the lens of create a really cool PowerPoint talk, do it, but like a performance. How does an actor do it?
Yeah.
Well, they write a script, they sit down, do a table read, they get on their feet, they block. And he was hosting a breakout at Social Media Marketing World. And I'll walk into this packed room thinking, what in the world? And I watched him over the course of about an hour with 3 or 4 speakers. And he would take like 5-minute sections of their talk and have them rework it and give pointers, and it would change how the whole thing came out.
Nice.
And I thought, wow, if this guy can do that, like he's the guy. And so at that point, I'm like, okay, I want to learn more. Looked it up. He had a conference. His conference was, I don't know, maybe $2,500 to attend in Fort Lauderdale. I'd never paid a conference ticket that high. I was like, God, that's a lot of money. I got to fly to Fort Lauderdale. But I started thinking, well, if this is going to be it, this is how I go learn it. I'm going to go learn it here. So it was right on the back end of a trip to Vegas. The funny part about it is as I'm leaving Vegas at the airport for a red eye, I get an email from a customer wanting me to keynote her state association event in April of 2017.
Okay.
And I'm like, oh, well, this is great timing. This is a sign.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, I got this. I have a speaking opportunity now. So I go to this event. And when I walk into the event, I'm sitting at the table. I'm chugging as much coffee as I can because I came from a red eye. And as I'm looking around this table of, I don't know, 6, 7 of us, I recognize a New York Times bestseller and another pretty well-known marketing person. And they're taking notes fast and furious. And I thought, if these guys that are that good at their job are paying this much attention, these people are legit. Okay. This is not a scam. So I went through the weekend. They did their sales pitch on a program, an in-person program that was very expensive. I sat on it, chewed on it, and thought, if this is really what I want to do, I need to go work with these people.
Yeah.
And so I made the investment, set it up on a 12-month installment with them, and started flying to Philadelphia every month for 5 months, 4 to 5 days at a time. Wow. And I would train Sunday, Monday, Tuesday from like 8 a.m. to 4 or 5 p.m. And Wednesday it was like from 8 to 1 or 2, and then I'd fly home. And it was all about writing and working the stage and vocal coach and all the pieces. It was a transformational experience professionally and personally. When I finished there, I went and hired a buddy of mine out of Nashville who teaches the actual speaking business. What is it? How to get booked? Learning more about the ins and outs. So I did the performance side because I've got to be really good on stage first.
Sure.
Then I learned the business side so I can get on stages. And I was like, I think this is what I want to do. And so 2017, I did the keynote for the state association. Customer pulls me aside and said, you need to raise your fee and you need to go do more of this. I said, okay.
That's usually a good sign. It's not like, don't ever talk to me
That's
again.
right. Very, very good sign. Yeah. And so Sam, I always text her and always give her big congrats every year of just thanks for continuing to believe. And so that really started it. And so 17, toward the middle of 17, I said, we're going all in on events this year. We're going to spend big, go to every big event we can. Break even, great, but in 2018, we're getting out of events. That decision almost sunk us as a company, but it was the one we needed because I had to turn us from an apparel-only company into an actual brand.
Yeah.
And that transformation, as long as I could grit my teeth and hang on through 2018 and figure out where extra income is going to come in, we would be fine. And sure enough, it was the right move. So we weathered through 18, barely hung on, piled up debt, and then 2019 speaking took off. Nice. And the brand took off with it, and everything kind of transformed into where we are now with speaking and coaching training and the book, and the apparel is still there, but it was really those little pieces along the way. And when I started the apparel business, I didn't have a coach or a mentor. Like I had some people I would reach out to that could give me tips on the marketing side, but nobody in the apparel business was like, let me teach you, here's what we've done. Couldn't find anybody that was willing to open up. They were so scarcity mindset.
Yeah.
The speaking side, I was like, there are coaches and I need to hire coaches because I've got to learn this faster and with less mistakes than I did the apparel side. And so it was a no-brainer to go hire those people to help me level up much quicker.
Well, it's interesting you say, a couple of things I want to comment on that. One, I have a buddy that's in the apparel business out in California, started a company called Rowan based on his son, and it's a really cool, kind of a little higher end, but really basic, kind of classic looking clothing brand. And so he's got a couple brick and mortars there. He's looking to do one here in Texas. But we had this very conversation 2 weeks ago. I'm like, Joe, you got to start getting yourself on camera. Like the brand is you, man. It's just about your son. It's also about the story of your relationship with your father, right? So we got to start getting like, don't be afraid to record a reel or just yourself on Instagram. And then he had some content that he had been sitting on for a while of him telling his story in a studio, and he posted that. And so he got the message, and I hope he continues that. But it's like you cannot separate Jake Thompson from Compete Every Day. You can't separate his brand for son Rowan and him. You have to be the face for it, right? Because that's how you pull yourself out of the pile of all the other apparel companies that maybe don't have a forward-thinking and visual CEO. So, all right, so now you're on the speaking circuit. Now you're doing a lot more of that. You said about 2019 is when it really took off?
Yeah, 17 and 18, I would get a little bit here and there, but 18 is really when I started heavy outbound, making calls, building relationships, and I was getting opportunities on stages. As a speaker, we can do outbound all day, but the best business is done on a stage because every gig ideally gets you one or two spinoffs off of it.
Well, and that's nothing. Same thing like a stand-up comic, right? You got to get on stage, one for the practice, but two, you got to be seen. You got to be able to have content that you can share. How are you going to prove that you're good as a speaker if you don't have a record of you actually speaking that somebody can see? Oh, this guy is pretty good, right? So just getting the content in of itself gives you the credibility too. So what type of events were you going and speaking at this time?
Yeah, so very fortunate. I just put it out into my network. So in 2018, I did the Dallas Entrepreneur Summit. So got to do one of the breakouts here. The marketing agency, one of the large marketing agencies, global agencies, I should say here, one of their heads of marketing is a friend of, his wife is a friend of my wife. So he's like, hey, we've got a split out day. We're doing an event. Would you come do a keynote for my team? Okay. Love it. Let's do it. Did that, would speak at schools, started reaching out to organizations that were like sales and leadership. And a lot of it was, I'll kind of take anything in 18 for that reason. I need reps. I need footage, pictures and video. I need people that have sat in the audience so I know what's hitting, what's not, and they can refer me. And then that way it builds that momentum for 19 of saying, okay, I'll go work this as much as I can and then start taking more of paid gigs in 19. And that's where guys reach out to me all the time and women as well. Like, I want to be a speaker. How do I go get paid gigs? I'm like, do 100 free ones. Like, quit worrying about getting paid and start worrying about getting good. If you get good, then you start getting paid. And so that was really what 17 and 18 were. Take any inbound I can, tell everybody in my network, this is what I'm starting to do. Let me come work with you. And then 19 shifting more and saying, how do we keep building the outbound and then utilize, oh, you are a happy client. Who do you know in your network that's not a competitor that would be a great fit for this as well?
Awesome, man. Well, and so obviously you're doing the keynote, which is part of the strategy, but I see you very active on social, you know, so social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, you're doing a lot of video content. You're doing obviously inspirational content, you know, pictures and stuff. So how does your strategy, morph itself when you go to the social media world rather than the in-person keynotes?
Yeah. So a lot of that shifted in March of 2020.
What happened then?
So I had, it's funny, by end of January 2020, I doubled my book of business from 19 already. Contracts, everything. 2 months later, obviously, most of that disappeared.
Sure.
Some switched virtual, some kept pushing. And I turned off all of the outbound sales at that point because I thought, well, nobody has a clue what's going on. I don't know which industries are getting hit, which are not. I just knew business was disappearing. So how do I, at that point, start creating content that people want to watch, engage with, or would share?
Yeah.
That's going to talk about what I talk about. And so I really shifted my whole focus into the inbound. How do I create things? And so that continued to morph and modify, but really where I try to focus on our end is I use social in a few ways. I use it as social proof. So I post clips from workshops I do or keynote events so that you see me in front of people.
Proof, I like that term. Yep.
And you have verification. Okay. Oh, he's spoken to this company or he's been at this event. So I do that on the posts and stories. The other thing I try to do is I mix in the encouragement because I got to live up to the chief encouragement officer. It's part of the brand. Yeah. And then like stuff like I posted today on LinkedIn of a little bit of educational, like today's post was around, we've all been in those workouts where it's, you hear the
one
voice.
With the push up and the dumbbell.
Yeah.
I saw
and everybody's like, hey, nobody's going to know if you take a rep off.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to know if you let up when you're in the gym. And I used to believe that was, well, you're just mentally weak. And I think that's a story we tell ourselves. And so I was like, no, it's actually, this is an opportunity. Everybody hears the voice. David Goggins talks about hearing the voice. And I won't say what he calls his inner voice, but he's like, I even hear the voice. I just tell the voice now to shut up and just start focusing on the work. And so I try to use some educational, either around mindset, around habits, or around tips for success, because I want those to be reinforcements of when I go on stage, these are the type of stories and content you're going to hear. And so really when I look at those three, it's like, okay, we've got a little bit of the social proof that talks about me. We've got a little bit of the encouragement that's to help boost you. And then we've got some of the educational that's here's how to try this to help you. And that's where I try to play, because I think a lot of people on social, and you can get caught up in the likes and the followers. And the more I've been in the game, the more I realize so much of that crap is fake and it's manufactured. And what I want to do is say, okay, if you go to my social page, you're going to see authentically who I am offline, get a very good feel for it. You're also going to see I know what I'm talking about and I can help bring value to you as an individual or you and your organization. And so that's how I try to look at all of those, and then just mix in some fun stuff with family or travel, things here and there, so you get to know a little more of me.
Well, I think the authenticity is a term that sometimes gets overused, and not the way that you're using it, but authenticity is exactly what you, in my opinion, is the same as the way I approach when I talk on a podcast. I turn the camera off. I talk the same way, right? Yeah. You're going to meet the same person that you meet on the podcast or in person, right, or at an event. I've had plenty of people that I have never met before in my life, but we developed a rapport on LinkedIn, similar interests, similar business interests. We finally meet in person, and it's like, we're the exact same people online. It's not this caricature. As I mentioned the term deep fake. I'm not some bot. I'm not some AI, which it does exist, obviously.
But not everybody's that way. That's the wild part is there's so many people that have an online persona, and there's a way to have your brand, and your brand represented online may be a little different sometimes if we're going to go have a beer.
It's curated to a degree, right? Yeah.
But there's a lot of individuals that who you think they are based on what they do and post online is not at all what they're like offline. And if they ever meet you offline, they automatically, you lose all credibility on everything you've done online.
Well, it's never meet your heroes, right?
That's right.
Yeah, because they will always disappoint you. But I think that's also the difference in mentality, right? If people have heroes that are, athletes or actors or something like that, more than more often than not, what they've created as this public persona has to be different by nature of what they do. And so that's, again, it's like I come into this, I'm almost 40. You said you're 39 this year, right? So like I started a little later in this. I've kind of built who I am up to this point. So there's no reason for me to sort of develop a character.
That's right.
But yeah, it's kind of interesting. And I want to talk to you a bit further about this. March of 2020 was the year pivot moment. That was my entrance into this world. So I've only been doing this a couple years now. I started with some whiteboard videos on something called stop loss insurance, which is in my industry is just a niche kind of type of insurance. And I thought, well, I'm going to make some videos. I don't know what to do. I was sitting kind of twiddling my thumbs to a degree when I couldn't go call on people and sell. I'm like, well, how do I get attention or how do I get people to come to me? And so I thought, well, this is the one thing I have to give. I was terrible at first. I didn't know how to frame.
You should always be embarrassed at your first.
Only thing I was embarrassed about is just how bad the production was, like how framing and all. But the point was, I had some acting training. I've done stand-up before, so I kind of knew what you mentioned earlier, the performance side of it, but I didn't know anything about the production side.
Yeah.
But that single step literally changed my life. I mean, and it's hard to even overstate how much it's broadened my network and got me invited to things and participate in things as part of why I have this job right now, all that stuff. And it's just been pretty fun to go. I thought social media was something totally different. It's a vehicle for you to grow your business, to grow your network, to sell. And it's a lot of fun too. I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't fun. And I'm sure you're probably the same way, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, the timing of that. I published a podcast on Monday about leaders should always publish and dealing with the fear of OPO, other people's opinions.
Okay.
And we lose our ability we lose the full ability to influence and impact people when we fail to put stuff out there because we're worried about what other people are going to say, or we're worried about the production value. Everybody's production value at the beginning is terrible.
Yep.
And if it's not, it's because you waited way too long. Because you put it out there and you're like, okay, how can I improve this? Okay, I'm going to move the camera angle a little bit, adjust some lighting. Let's do another one. Like, you get the reps to improve where you're a lot more comfortable. And as leaders or potential leaders listening to this, people need to hear your thoughts and your opinions on, what's going on in the market. And, what do you think? You could be right, could be wrong. But if you talk about it and why you're reasoning, people start to understand you and they can relate with you. And then they want to follow you. And then you have the ability to influence them and do business with them. But you can't do that if you're like, social media is stupid.
Yeah.
Or you're just like, I'm going to just not engage and interact with people and just spam everybody. So looking at it from that lens of how do you just start little by little, put one post a week on LinkedIn, 5 comments. Then next week I'll do 2 posts and 5 comments. And you get into the rhythm of actually sharing your thoughts or what you're reading and what you think about it. You can develop the opportunity to influence, which, as we know, will grow your business opportunities because it grows your relationships.
Well, and I think the term influencer, right? That's one that gets bandied about, and I kind of poke fun at the idea of the very superficial style influencer on like an Instagram. But what you and I are talking about, and obviously being a little later in life, if I was 18, I probably have a little less substance than I do now. But having actual influence, like in thought leaders, another term that is kind of cringy unless somebody else gives you that label. But it is what it is. If you're not putting yourself out there, if you're not actually putting your value system out there, your belief system, what you want to talk about, people can't find you, then kind of what's the point? You're anonymous to a degree. So if you have any interest in leadership, any interest in speaking, any interest in building a brand, whatever it is, you have to be out there. And that's 100%. A message that a couple of guys in my industry, Ryan Miller, I mentioned to you earlier, Andy Neary is another one. Those guys are great at just that message. You got to be visible. You have to be able to draw attention, the right type of attention. But if you're not, nobody knows who you are. And it's going to make your life, especially as a salesperson, infinitely harder if nobody knows who you are in the front. Absolutely. So I want to ask you, we'll do one direct tie into my industry, right? So
Let's
insurance,
do it.
right? So self-funded podcast about self-funded insurance. You do speak sometimes at insurance-related conferences. So how do you alter, if at all, your message to that industry versus maybe a more broad or a general audience?
Yeah, so most of mine are very industry specific. So insurance, talked with a company, a large company in this space, worked with them. I've talked with construction teams and real estate teams. And a lot of my core principles are really, I call it the competitive advantage model. So from an individual standpoint, it focuses on your mindset, your focus, and your systems. On a team standpoint, it's all about the development of your leaders and your culture and how you're setting and living up to your standards.
Okay.
And so those kind of tie in well together, and they've all got branches off of it. But every one of my pieces of content and talks fall under those umbrellas. Okay. And what happens is with every client, stand-up comedy, you know so well, you've got 100 bits. But depending on how long you have on stage, what you told last time and what the audience is, you're going to pull specific bits up to work.
Yeah.
Speaking's the same way. I have calls, introduction calls with clients. I want to know, what are your challenges? Like your team members, what are they challenged with the most on the day-to-day basis? Okay. What are you seeing? Where are you feeling friction? How do you talk internally? Like what are key phrases that you use and language you're using internally? And I'll explain why that's so important in a minute. And then what's your mission and values? What do you think your mission and values are? And what do the teams think they are? The reason that's so important, the one why I speak your same language is because regardless of who you are, work mom, work dad, managers are no different than parents. Employees hear things, it goes in one ear, it goes out the other until they hear it from a third party. Kid has heard this for 15 years from mom and dad. They come home, hey, Coach so-and-so told us hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. That's so cool. I'm going to focus on working hard. And dad or mom is like, we've been telling you that forever, but it takes someone that's not that. Same happens at work. And so I want to speak your language so that they're hearing the same thing from someone outside. And then I want to speak to the specific challenges so that it's not for me, it's not 60 minutes. If you're just paying me for 60 minutes, it's a waste of time and money. You're bringing the 10 to 15 years of experience I have in terms of marketing, running a business, managing people, all of that, in addition to creating content and giving actionable content that's going to live for 6 months if it's continued to be applied. Nice. And so anybody can walk in and fire up people and they leave, and on Monday morning, it's like, what do we do with that? Yeah. It's a lot harder to say, okay, here's actually how we start to change your mindset and your self-talk. Here's how we improve your systems and your focus. Here's how we change the accountability model. And so, for instance, this client in the insurance space, we talked about with them, there were a couple of challenges they had. First, it was nobody's really talking and using each other internally because they're stuck in the way of we've always done it this way versus we're growing, we're acquiring new partners. We're changing how we do business and who you have opportunity and I would say access to. So one of the talks with them was, you have a cheat code. And I told you this, like the old Contra cheat code, up, down, left, right, BA start. It gave you like 30 lives. It was the way to play. I talked about like this room is a giant cheat code. And what you're doing is making it harder on yourself and you're hurting your clients if you're not taking advantage of the people in this room either to partner with or to learn from. Because somebody young in here knows how to do something somebody veteran does not from maybe a technological standpoint. And a veteran in here that's owned their brokerage for 20, 30 years knows how to handle certain challenges that somebody in year 3 or 4 doesn't know. So how are we using this internally? And I gave them questions and some activities to actually implement. The other thing we talked about is just challenging the mindset and the status quo specifically to them and where they were going as a company. And I used the case study of the Bulls from the 89 and 90 season. Okay. Chicago Bulls, best player in the NBA, Michael Jordan. He was the leading scorer in the NBA. His coach, Doug Collins, had taken them to the Eastern Conference Finals. They lost for the second year in a row to the Detroit Pistons. And at that point, the Bulls fire him. They bring in Phil Jackson, who was unknown at that point. Phil wanted to run this offense called the triangle. Well, unlike Doug Collins' offense that was like, get Jordan the ball, let him score, triangle offense says, Jordan, we need you to pass it and get it out of your hands. The best player in the league, we want to take the ball out of your hands and play with everybody else so that we make the whole team better. Yeah. Jordan could have easily said, screw it, I'm not playing this. Jordan was like, I'm willing to give this a shot to go where I've never gone before. First year, didn't work. Bulls got knocked out of the playoffs again by the Pistons. But if you've seen The Last Dance, that following offseason, they did 2 things. They bought into the triangle offense. They said, okay, if this is how we're going to play, we're going to learn it and play it well. Then they started working out together. Jordan hired Tim Grover, the famous trainer. The team, instead of all going home in the offseason, stayed and practiced and trained together all offseason. Nice. So the best player in the game of basketball says, to get where I want to go, I have to do something I've never done. So how am I going to focus on an offense that's asking something different, and how am I going to change my body? The team followed lead. We obviously know what happens after that. They became a dynasty. Those pieces are how we started to relate to specifics within their organization and their growth, talking around that. So a lot of the stories are going to be the same in industry because business is it's sales, it's relationship, it's habits and consistency. The key components to be successful in your industry is no different than in construction, no different than in real estate. The trick is, and what makes certain speakers better than others are, can they speak your language? Can they address your specific problem? So when I'm on stage and I can call somebody out who I met last night at a cocktail dinner, or I can talk about a specific challenge we're having of embracing, say, Salesforce, people in the audience know, oh, this isn't just a canned talk. He's actually gotten to know our company, and that helps us. And so that's where it starts to differ, because then if I can connect with them and they know, oh, he starts to understand our problems, maybe I need to listen a little bit more than just Joe Schmo. Yeah. Then, and I can give you something to say, by the time you walk away, you could have 6 things that you could apply or 1. All I care about is if you will take one of these things we talk about and put it into practice. It's the can't see choice that we know will compound over time to create a positive can't miss result.
Love it, man. You got me fired up, but Jake, I appreciate it. I want to say, if there's one mission I will have out of this particular podcast and having you on, is I want to get you on another insurance-related stage as a result of this, and happy to make those introductions. But in the interest of wrapping you up and getting you on your way, man, the future of Compete Every Day. I mean, I know you've got some visions. I know you probably have some things you can and cannot talk about, but where do you want to take this brand in the next few years? Yeah,
so we're really a diverse brand now in terms of the speaking, coaching, book, podcast, and apparel. And the things we can do with that, with conferences, conventions, teams, has changed. Where I see things going is we're getting ready to start bringing someone in pretty soon to really run the apparel side of our business as a standalone business. Because it continues to grow, but I believe there's a rate it can grow at a much faster clip if someone focuses exclusively as if it was a business on its own. The beauty is everything I do, speaking, coaching, and writing, helps it, and everything it does helps me. So it'll always be connected. So that's a really exciting piece for us, as the brand on that end continues to grow. On my end, it's really building out more offerings from a digital standpoint that we can provide companies, that we can continue to grow. I mean, we've created programs over the last 18 months to partner with organizations on, I do monthly on-sites with certain groups, I do quarterly on-sites, and then I do every 6 months virtual or in-person programs with the same client. So I get to know their teams, get to help their teams, and really help them grow and develop. And so those programs are new, but really where we want to go. Because as much as I would love to do 50, 60 keynotes a year, that's great. It's a lot of fun. It probably boosts my ego. But I would much rather say, hey, let's work with 10 to 15 companies max and go deeper, because I can do a lot in 60 minutes. But if we're working together over 6 to 12 months, how much more can we change your culture, how people work? Because I believe the better we can build the people, the better they're going to work for the company. The better they work for the company, the better the company becomes.
Well, not to mention, though, if you make your time a little more scarce, then your fee will have to go up on that keynote.
Fee will obviously go up on the keynote.
I know, because there's still probably, some of the biggest people in the world will get paid to do keynotes. That fee is just significantly larger.
That's right.
So, all right, man, the floor is yours. Closing thoughts, man. I really appreciate you spending this past almost hour with me and sharing your story, man. But what would you want to leave the audience with?
I would say the one thing I always try to encourage folks with is the idea that change of any kind, whether you're not where you want to be in your career, your business hadn't gone to the level you want, maybe you're looking at your personal life thinking, oh, I put on a little too much weight, or I really would love to change this. We tend to get overwhelmed by trying to change everything all at once. And the reason I believe this idea of competing every day is so important is because it takes 1% to be better than you were the day before. And it's so tiny you don't even see it. But over time, that 1% stacks to a very noticeable result. And so if you're wanting to change your health, start by doing just a 20-minute walk outside today, or swap that pizza and wings you were going to have at lunch for a salad. It's one little thing. On its own, it doesn't look like much. But if you woke up tomorrow and said, what's one more thing I can do? And you start to add on to it, creates massive results. And so most of America, I think, doesn't take action because they're too overwhelmed trying to do everything versus looking for one little thing they can do. And so my encouragement to anyone is just to say, hey, what do I want to be better at? Who do I want to be in 5 years from now? What's something that they would do where they'd be more disciplined, more focused, better with their habits, and say, what's one thing I could do today to be a little more like that, and start working down that path and play the 5-year game instead of trying to win the 5-minute one.
Awesome, man. Well, brilliantly said, Jake, and I really appreciate you, man. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks for also taking me on a different journey than we typically go on this podcast, which was intentional, man. But it's been a pleasure, and hope to talk to you again soon, man.
Let's do it.
All right.
True Captive believes in healthcare that is personal and insurance that isn't complicated. Check them out at truecaptive.com.